Welcome to the Recovery Bros podcast. This is a weekly YouTube show where two guys in recovery, myself and Doug, we translate addiction and mental health science into simple systems young men can actually live through honest conversations, practical frameworks, and real world tools. These are the conversations we wish we could have listened to when we were first getting sober. Tonight we have our first guest ever. We have David Manheim with us, who is the host of the show Dopey. And David and I actually just met right now for the first time, but Doug has known David for a while. So, David, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And it's an honor to be included in the first Recovery Bros podcast. I'm a total anti-bro. I don't think I've never said the word bro. Never once. I mean,
Well,
except
there's
describe.
another first being recorded tonight.
Yeah. So I feel excited. I feel included finally into the brosphere. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
We know what's interesting, Dave, is that, we created this podcast to be like, okay, what would people have wanted to know, like early days of recovery to help get them through? I know your show has served a very similar goal, but different because your show is mainly geared towards, obviously it's recovery focused, but it's like the addict's journey of how can they find somebody to relate to, how can they find hope, how can they not give up on themselves and feel like they're not alone. Take us back to how the evolution of Dopey. I know it's had a lot of twists and turns.
We started it when I first got sober, which I really love to reflect on it. It's like kind of like remembering being born kind of thing. You're just kind of there. I got sober in the summer of 2015, and I was a horrible drug addict, and I had been using for 20 years or something when I got sober. And one of my best friends who I met in treatment, he was one of my best friends in treatment, and he was this horrible drug addict. He had put together a year and a half, and he basically did it all in 12 step. And I had gotten like a year together almost in 12 step, but I didn't really do the work and it didn't really speak to me. I just kind of needed to go someplace. So I started calling my friend, his name was Chris, and we just started like he and I had this sort of like horrible drug addict, love to make each other laugh feeling. And I couldn't believe that he was swallowing the spirituality so hook, line, and sinker. And I want because I believed him, so I wanted it from him. And I had done I've always been like interested in making creative things. Like I played in bands and whatever. And the summer before I got sober, I did a web series at Katz's Deli where I still work, called The Last Jewish Waiter, about this waiter who hates waiting tables and he wants to have a talk show. So he does a talk show while he waits tables. And Chris, when I was getting sober, was like, why don't we do something like that? And I was like, okay, well, why don't we just make a podcast about dumb drug stories? And that was the beginning. And it was supposed to just be about war stories. And then it evolved because I haven't stopped making it in 10 and a half years.
Dave, I know Chris unfortunately passed away, which was heartbreaking for you in the show for many reasons. Talk about that. And then the second part of the question there is, like, how'd you keep going? Because a lot of people would have just quit or gone back, but it was really admirable that you've kept going.
I never thought of it as admirable. Like I had wanted to have a talk show basically my whole life. And because of my circumstances in recovery and with Chris, I finally had one. And by the time he died, we had done 142 episodes. We had never missed a week. And we were very passionate about making the show. And I've talked to Doug about this before, and I talk about it as a lot, that to this day, I don't make the show for anybody else. I don't make the show to serve the community. I don't make the show to help anybody. I make the show because it's what I always wanted to do. And it's fun. I like it. It's what I wanted to do. And Chris and I would always say it too. It's like, if we made Dopey to help anybody, we didn't think anybody would get helped. We made the show to make each other laugh. And then the byproduct was people got help from it. What was the other part of the question? I have a very short attention span.
It was like when Chris passed away.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I mean, he died, and my wife, we had just had our second daughter. We had just bought a house, and he died, and it's still very emotional for me to think of those days. I didn't believe he died. You know what I'm saying? Like I didn't even believe he was dead when I found out. It took me 4 or 5 hours and multiple confirmations for me to actually process the fact that he was gone. And my wife was like, you really don't have to make the show anymore. And for me, that wasn't even on the table for a second that I was going to stop making the show. I loved making the show. I finally had something that I really wanted to do. I felt really good about doing. So what I said to myself and what I said to the audience was, I'm not gonna. I mean, I pictured it like a drug dealer who shows up every night, and their people count on that drug dealer to show up. We count on the street lamp turning on, and I thought our audience counted on Dopey showing up on Friday night. Like, and I didn't want to stop that because Chris was gone. But I did say to myself, it can't be the same show. And it might not be fun. And it definitely was not fun for a long time after he died. And I said to myself, if it's not fun or if it sucks for a long period of time, if both of those things happen, I'll stop making the show. But otherwise, I want to figure it out. And I did. And it has sucked here and there, and it's not been fun here and there, but I love making the show more than almost everything. Still.
One of the things because I've listened to a good number of the episodes of the show, is the use of humor as a mechanism for honesty about what recovery really is. Like, was that part of the idea going into it, or did that just evolve because you guys like to joke and say quote unquote dumb shit and poke holes at the idea of recovery, and it kind of brings more honesty and realism to what this thing is that we're all involved in.
Definitely. I mean, I think excuse me. I think from the first moment, it was supposed to be funny. It was supposed to be dismantling the kind of Pollyanna-ish holier than thou idea around speaking on recovery. Because like if we were two IV drug addicts who made fun of everything. And if we approached it in any other way, it wouldn't have been a thing. And the other thing was I'm such a fan of comedy talk shows that I wanted our show to exist in that tradition of kind of having two friends who make fun of each other but are obviously bonded. And then with what we were talking about was it was cool in order like we would get to serious places. We had a lot of like tragic moments in our lives, and if you just laugh at them, you kind of don't really serve them. So we would laugh at them until one of us would point out, oh yeah, but that's really up. And then we'd kind of take a step back and actually process it. So it was a lot of shtick, and it was really funny, but it was also like we kind of called each other out when we were deflecting too much. So it kind of had a good mix. That was the idea, at least.
What have you learned about addiction and recovery through your show?
Well, I also want to say this. The first thing I ever said about Dopey was it was the podcast on drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. And that was the first thing I think that we said on episode 1, and it came out of nowhere. And Chris was very adamant that every show should start with that. And when he was alive, I always pushed back against it, and I would change it up just to with him a little bit. I would say something else, and he always would get annoyed. And now, after he died, every show I've said the podcast on drugs, addiction, and dumb shit at the beginning. And what I've learned about recovery, well, Chris was really very smart about a lot of things, and he was very well studied around addiction, recovery, 12-step, different methods. He had a great, I mean, Doug knew Chris. He was very bright, and he had a lot of knowledge over science, psychology, straight recovery, spiritual recovery. So the first thing I needed to do was get more seasoned because I really didn't know anything. And I wound up going to like an AA big book study. I wound up doing a ton more work in my recovery just to keep up with Chris so I wouldn't be like an idiot on the show. So in doing that, I learned a ton about recovery. And then kind of what happened to him was kind of a common thing, not the dying necessarily, but he lost interest in program. His life got much bigger, like our lives get so much bigger when we get some time. And he had really, we both lost a lot of interest in program. And where we might have been doing 3 or 4 meetings a week, and in the beginning I was going every day, he he was he was getting his PhD in psychology. He was working at a sober house. He was a sober companion. He was engaged to marry a woman who was in medical school at Harvard. His life was so big and busy. He kind of let the program slip, and I did too. And then after he died, I got right back into program hardcore. And I think I learned even more at that point, because it really I mean, you hear all the cliches about suiting up and showing up and all that stuff. But the truth is, as long as we keep going, we have the chance to get there. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned about life and recovery. It's the same kind of recipe to succeed.
One of the things I like a lot about on the show when you guys talk about recovery is the kind of um, the rejection of like the sanctimony of the language that they use. There's such like recovery jargon that has so much sanctimonious nature to it. Like what what is it about recovery that you think um, relies so much on that? And then do you think that your understanding of recovery is that that stuff exists, but it's kind of like seeing the forest for the trees? Like, why do you think that sanctimonious language exists? And it's so, because when you look at it from the outside, it is kind of like it's a comedy bit. Like it is worth making fun of a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that's something everybody in recovery needs to push back on in some way or another. It's like it's also because recovery programs, 12-step stuff was born in the 30s, and it didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of these other Christian groups that were born in the 20s and the 10s. So all this sanctimony goes back to a time before it was really sanctimonious. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
genuine. And then we're carrying over all these really genuine ideas and really quotes that don't necessarily carry the same weight that they did back in the day. But if, as long as you wind up someplace where you hear somebody like the most sanctimonious, the most Pollyannish, the most sounding recovery jargon, if it comes from the right person, you're like, holy shit. You know what I mean? Like the right person can spin that into prophecy. You know what I mean? And the wrong person just sounds like they're full of shit. So it's like trying to get to the place where you can deconstruct the jargon into something that can be helpful, and find the reality in it. And I think they set it up like that, like for stupid people to catch on, and for everybody to like kind of play along. And the problem is, like, people who are on the fence are really turned off by it, but really desperate people are like, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah, it's funny because it is kind of like a nursery rhyme. Here's line one. You repeat this. Here we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Dave, I know your show's done a lot to reduce like stigma in the addiction community. What do you make of like terms like substance use disorder, cannabis use disorder? Do you think they actually help, or do you think that, I mean, I've never heard anyone be like, yeah, my name is so and so and I have substance use disorder. It's like normally it's like I'm a drug addict, or I used to be addicted to drugs, or I'm clean. Like I personally think it's just medical stuff to get people into treatment. What are your thoughts?
I think people have weird relationships with words and terms, and people have like, I have a good friend who's sober 16 years. Like, and I talk to him very often. And the other day he told me when he goes to meetings, he doesn't say he's an alcoholic. He says he's a person in recovery. And I was like, dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? I was like, why don't you just say you're a fucking alcoholic? And I think he's like, well, why should I shame myself? And I don't find any shame in any language. I went to some conference in December where everyone was saying they had substance use disorder. And I think at just some point, it's like some people like apple cobbler and some people like chocolate chip ice cream. And like, I say I'm a drug addict because I like how it sounds, It's kind of how I was raised, and it describes who I am, and I don't feel any shame around it. I feel really good and comfortable, and I think the most important thing is that people find whatever language makes them feel good, and I'm like, more power to you, because, like, I think the greatest thing I've ever learned in my recovery is the only thing that's really important is my recovery, like, is honoring my recovery and not with anybody else's, because when I do that, that's when, like, there's problems, you know?
Yeah, I think I've told you before, Doug. I think it's interesting. Like I walk around with substance use disorder label all day long because my last name is SUD, which is the
I love
medical
that.
acronym for substance.
Yeah,
You were born to be an addict, bro.
for real. You're born with substance use disorder, and I just noticed
Yeah,
that. It's
it's
awesome.
so it's Doug and I have talked about this a lot. It's like you know, do does making it using things like substance use disorder versus addiction, person in recovery versus an addict, like I think in the beginning, if it gives someone permission to walk into a room and start taking action, great. As long as it doesn't become a permission slip to not move forward, like it to define it as a fixed state, right? Which is like, I have a problem with it seeing addiction as just a disease, right? That there's an opportunity for someone to take that and go, well, this I have a disease, and so that's why I am the way I am. It's like, well, it's not all that there is.
I always really struggled with the disease concept, the disease definition. I never enjoyed it. And when Chris was alive, we pushed back on it immediately. Kind of, I did it definitely from like an uneducated, uninformed place where it didn't equate to me. Like my mother had died of leukemia, which seemed like a real disease. And my drug addiction didn't seem like that to me. So we would just call it an affliction. But I'm not about, like, if somebody needs to call it a disease, and somebody could debate me from here to next year and they'd probably win. It's just I don't like the term. Like, I don't think it helps us to say we have an incurable disease that can be arrested. I think and I also think the bigger picture in general is like, if there was a solution for drug addiction and alcoholism that worked for everybody, everybody would be cued into it. It's such a mysterious situation that does not save everybody. And people try the same thing that worked for you or Doug or me, and it doesn't work for them. And other people do stuff that wouldn't have worked for us. So it's like just trying to unlock the combination for that person. And whatever good we can do is like, that's such a beautiful thing in general.
Dude, you and I would have been friends early in recovery because I had the same unearned arrogance about this is not a disease, like perspective. I was like, it was like a total fu to everyone in the room. It was like, this is what you are. I was like, don't tell me who I am. You
Right.
know.
Right. It's like, I don't want to, I'm still like that. I get so bitter and stupid and angry so easily, but I know it doesn't serve me.
Yeah, I think Dave, I agree with you, and I don't think we should shame anyone based on how they view addiction. I think the problem that I have with it is from a mainstream general perspective. If you're telling the entire world that addiction is a disease, then people are going to be like, "Oh, it is. It must be a disease. My brain is messed up." I remember talking to Bob Forrest, who I know you know very well, Dave, as well, and like years ago, and he was telling me, like, he said the problem that he had with that, and his position could have changed since then, because this was back in 2017, 2018, or something like that, but he's like, you go into an AA meeting and they tell you that everyone is an addict and everyone's a disease, but like most people aren't. There's a lot of people. Some people have trauma. Some people it was their environment. Some people they just liked getting messed up, and then that led to an addiction. Like, was there a certain percentage of people that were just born with like seeing a bottle of wine and were like, I need 10, probably, but not 100%. It's much less than that, and that's my big issue with that. If somebody wants to say they have a disease, like, I don't care. Like, if that gets them well, then by all means, like, that's their
Well,
prerogative.
I think that it goes to the point that we can't define a disease as a fixed state either. That there is a measurable, there are measurable mechanisms that are causing suffering, and that are causing what you would call like it creates disorder in your life, and it causes impairment, and it responds to treatment. It's like, well, there you go. Okay, so labeling that aspect of it as a disease, which allows insurance to create solutions, is fine, but like it's more than just that. That's a variable in the equation.
They're looking for easy definitions that can also make it so that insurance will pay out, and it's like it's a crazy dance, you know, and but it certainly me up, you know what I mean? Substance abuse, drug addiction, whatever you want to call it, destroyed my life, and recovery has saved it. So like, and that's kind of like the basics for me. I love hating on everything, but as long as the basics are my life is better because I'm not using and because I try to be a good person, like that's it's pretty sweet. You know what I mean? It's pretty simple when you just break it down. And then like with Dopey, it was just so that we could have a good time, like telling stories, because there's so many entertaining stories. And I like to hear people's, like, everybody's different solution and everybody's different path, and what, like, like God. It's like I was with my kid yesterday, and we're driving around town to pass out invitations for her 8th birthday party. And out of nowhere, she goes, "Dad, is God real?" And I said, "To me, God is real." And she goes, "Well, who is it?" And I said, "Well, to me, it's the universe. It's everything. It's love." And she goes, "That's not true, Daddy. God is a person and he doesn't exist." And it's just like that's the beginning of like that's how we are. Like we decide what things are and we stick with it until something shakes the vision, you know? But it was she didn't want to hear about it.
Well, I think what you brought up is really interesting because I think that like perspective is everything, right? And how one person sees something is how somebody else might not see that or may see it, right? And given that, Adam and I recently did an episode and we talked about Britney Spears going to rehab and how fame impacts mental health and how that impacts your ability to get help because you have people enabling you. You're in a different world when it comes to addiction. And Adam's on the board of the Matthew Perry Foundation. And I say that because I know that you've had on, a bunch of celebrities. I think you just had Jamie Lee Curtis like sitting on your lap in your house or something like that, like last month.
I did. It was something.
What have you seen? What's been like the common thread? Like, why do celebrities struggle in the same way that the everyday person does?
I don't have a sweeping diagnosis. I think if anything, there might be more of a diagnosis with young people. Like where fame hits a young person, and then it leaves them, and maybe to cope with all of the stuff around fame, they develop habits using or drinking or whatever, and then the fame goes away, and they want that feeling to stay, so they try to fill the same hole. But I don't know Britney's situation. I mean, what I know best about Britney is she had, co-occurring mental illness stuff. And I never met her, and I never drank with her or got high with her or have any idea of what she used or didn't use. And I think that with famous people, from my perspective, is like they're basically the same as the rest of us, right? It's just like feeling like something isn't good enough, feeling that something feels better when they take X, Y, or Z, and then kind of like what Adam was describing before, how you take this thing, you feel better, and you're like, "Oh, I know to take it to feel better." And I feel like poor Brittany, like she's been tossed around the whole in front of the world from this child. She was this very vulnerable child who got famous at like 8 or 10 on Disney. And then she was the biggest star in the world, and then and we saw everything. And I think she had other issues. And I think I don't know that celebrity does anything except raise the stakes and have everybody be more aware of what's up with a person, because you and I have seen so many normal people have the same problems as these celebrities. It's just with the celebrities we know who they are, and we don't know who the normal people are.
You tell me though, sometimes when you have these celebrities on, while it's like awesome to talk to somebody like Jamie Lee Curtis or Mark Maron, what really does well on the show is like the dopey guests. Like they're not. I've heard you say they're not dopey enough for the audience. Like explain to Adam what that means.
Yeah.
I think Adam gets it. I can see it in his face that Adam gets it. People like the raw. What people like more than anything is somebody that comes on the show that wants to be on the show. that kind of wants to connect with an audience of up drug addicts, and they know they have that up and they bring it and they tell the most crazy stories ever. And then we find a way to laugh about it. And then we find out what the consequences were. Kind of the greatest, usually the greatest Dopey guest is a guest who's done some you can't believe they've done and somehow crawled back from the primordial ooze to life. And can I mean, what we and Chris would say is they can laugh, the survivors laugh that they didn't die and that they found some sort of grip in reality. And we've also had people on. One of my favorite guests is now in jail. He's a guy that we called Fentanyl J, and I met him at meetings out here. And he wound up, he when he first came into the program, he was busted in Ohio with 5,000 hits of fentanyl, and then he bottomed out, on fentanyl, and then he got sober and it didn't last. But he was just such an amazing storyteller, such a charismatic personality, and just this uniquely magnetic drug addict. For a second, he looked like he had it together. For a second, and then it all unraveled. And his first episode was very well received, but every episode after kind of wasn't, because the audience could detect that he was not coming from a place of recovery, and they were very worried about his situation. So a great Dopey guest is usually somebody with the story and also can find the comedic aspect of the story, and that they go to the other side of the moon and back, but also that they have some sort of perspective in recovery, because it makes you feel safe listening to them.
I think that also the ability to find humor in your story is to give everyone permission to realize that at the end of the day, like this can all just be looked at from a perspective of like, this was so absurd. I'm not who I used to be. Let's find the humor in it, because Jimmy Carr said that laughter is freedom because authoritarianism doesn't allow it. And so, like, if you can laugh at your story, you've basically relinquished your story from having real control over you. And I think that that's a great way to do it.
I love that. It's brilliant. Laughter is freedom. Say that again. I really want to understand
Laughter
that.
is the sound of freedom because authoritarianism doesn't allow it. You can't make jokes about something if you're in an authoritarian environment. Like, you're only allowed to say what you're allowed to say.
I also think that's the nature of drug addicts, right? The nature of drug addicts is to be in defiance against whatever authority is around them. And drug addicts really relate to defiance, anti-authority, and when we can laugh at the things that people said we should never be able to laugh, it's the thing that brings us together more than anything and sets us free. So I think that's a great interpretation of it, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's why I think your show is so valuable. It's because it gives everyone, even if they're not willing to do it themselves, if they can't say it, at least they can laugh at someone else doing it, which is a start.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like it feels good. Like we need to feel as good as we can. We can't do if we can't do drugs. We it's good when we can find a way to laugh a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dave, what's been the story that rocked you the most? Where you left like, oh my god, like that really, like you were like speechless.
I mean, the deaths. Chris's death. Chris's death was horrific. Chris's death like got me so angry, but it was the death before Chris's death that stopped me in my tracks, and it was one of my very best friends, this guy named Todd, who I had met in college, and I had used with him, from when we were 18 and until he died. He died at I want to say it was 8 years ago, so he was 43 or something, 44, and we had gotten addicted to heroin together. We had lived in New York together. We lived in Los Angeles together. We drove back and forth together, I think 3 times. Um, Went to college with him and tried to help him, and he wound up dying. I knew he wasn't. He was trying to get to recovery, and it was right. It was 6 weeks before Chris died, So we had just bought the house. We had literally had our second child that, within a month. It's like 3 weeks. I remember we were giving the baby a bath when I got a phone call from a mutual friend that Todd had died, and I was destroyed. I was destroyed, like, and weeping. And my older daughter was like, "What happened?" And I couldn't really tell her. In terms of, in terms of like every other story on the show, it's just grist for the mill. But when you lose your best friend, it's like it really it changed my whole perspective around the show too, because I had laughed about things that I don't think I would laugh about anymore after Todd died, and then of course after Chris died. And I think Chris's death is really one of the biggest reasons our show is so big, which is,
Can
I
you
think
expand on that? Why do you think that?
I think we had an audience. It was like we had an audience. We had just gotten Artie Lang from the Howard Stern show on our show, and we had a bump in the listenership. And I was like, oh, that's cool. People came to listen to Artie. Within, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, Chris died, and the spike in listenership was out of control. And that was even before um the This American Life thing. So basically I think what happened was, over the course of 2.5 years, we had X amount of people listening, probably very irregularly. And they would pop in here, pop in there, whatever. And when Artie came on, a lot of them was like, holy shit, they got Artie on. And then when Chris died, everybody was just like, holy shit, what the happened? And they were like glued. And then all sorts of other people who were like, kind of ambulance chasing, rubbernecker, looky loo types, were like, who want to hear about, tragedy. Like, we're all drawn to tragedy. We're all drawn to sad stories. We all want to feel connected. And death is one of the things that unites us, because it's the nature of existence that it doesn't last forever. And everybody that we know, we're going to lose. So I think also, out of Chris's death, the Dopey Nation Facebook group started, and it was just started as a mourning process for the audience. And it really, the words they always say is, it trauma bonded the audience. Because we lost, I don't know, 5 or 6 people who were very instrumental in the show, uh before, up to Chris, everybody who died. And then after Chris died, we lost 3 more people who were very instrumental in the show and the community. And so that means we don't even know how many non-instrumental people died. But and then also, because of that same nature, This American Life covered our show. And when This American Life covered our show, it basically became a show, it's almost about the hubris of a show about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit, where one of their hosts had to die. I think that was just so compelling to people, because also Chris came from a good family, and had morals and values, and was really well educated. And the fact that it could have, and was handsome and young. He died at 33, 32, 33. And the fact that somebody like that could be a casualty, people were like, holy shit. And they had to know what happened.
Yeah. What if you, what do you, what are your hopes for the show Dopey? Like, if we could, you know,
Totally irrational hopes. Like, my hopes don't make any sense. It's like,
what are they though?
the things I think about, it makes no sense. It's like, it's total insanity. Like, I think it should be like the biggest podcast in the world, and it's just like about fentanyl overdose. It's like, why would people listen to our show? It doesn't make sense.
No. Let's put things. Dave just sold out the Comedy Store in L.A. and he had Bobby Lee there, Mark Maron, Margaret Cho. Like, come on, like your show is.
Well,
You've
I
built it.
think a show like this is actually the exact kind of show you'd want to be one of the biggest in the world, because it's probably the most honest conversations about addiction recovery that you could listen to from like a talk show perspective, because there's the dark humor there, because we're going to go there, the lines of like social niceties are removed, which means this might actually be the realest conversation we're going to hear. And so I think it's not irrational at all.
Well, I want to, if I could be everything I wanted to be, I would be like some sort of like real talk show host that talks about more stuff than just addiction and recovery. I've just figured out how to do this. and I like it, and I'm just kind of in this niche. I wouldn't know how to do it. I mean, like, have you ever get into a situation where you're like, I know how to do this thing, and you do the
Yes.
thing, and then all of a sudden you have someone and it's totally different, and you're like, I don't really know how to do this thing like this. And I've had that happen a lot on the show where I'd had a guest who's like I had Michael Imperioli from The Sopranos on the show. Um, and it was good, but it doesn't follow the arc that I'm very familiar with at this point, having done like 1,000 episodes of Dopey. And it's a different kind of animal. And if I could do it however I wanted, I would find a way to do, keep doing Dopey, but find a way to do some straight interviews with people that I would just like to talk to. And I don't have the real drive or passion to find them. But if you're asking me a real question, I would like to be like Bill Maher, Joe Rogan, and Howard Stern, and be famous and have people want to have me on their Netflix show. And
Dave,
that's what I'm gonna do.
Dave, Meta's kind of booted you off the platform a couple times for
Yes.
stuff you've posted.
Yes.
Obviously,
Hold on, Doug. What's your interpretation of my Bill Maher, Howard Stern, Joe Rogan fantasy?
I think it's there. I mean, I think you have the very similar, honest, off the cuff, unfiltered conversations with them that I think can lead to amazing change, and also just the realness and rawness of the conversation. I think there's a lot of potential there.
So you
Plus,
think
it's
you?
entertaining.
Yes,
Plus, it's entertaining. That's the most important part. It's like, it's sensational. Why would you have more people want to listen to a conversation? Because it's entertaining.
That's what I'm saying. Okay,
Yeah.
very good. Thank you. I appreciate the validation. That feels good.
We got a few minutes left, but before we close, because if people like end up going and checking out Dopey, Meta's booted you off a few times for stuff you've posted. I've known you long enough to know that you don't encourage drug use. You're just somebody trying to relate, be funny, make people kind of feel included. How do you toe that line though? Like, do you ever think about like, I probably shouldn't post this, or you just like, whatever?
That's a great question. I think it's like we were talking about authority, you know what I mean? And like, and how we operate under the guise of authority. And with something like a podcast, there is no governing body that stopped us from saying anything. And that's why our audio podcast was so much more successful than anything else we did. People could listen and nobody really promoted it or stopped it or whatever. They Googled drug podcast and Dopey came up, and that's how that worked. With Meta, I didn't really understand how it worked or the rules. And it took me 10 times of getting punished and getting kicked off. I mean, I got kicked off Instagram after they had warned me 20 times. It's like my regular life. I just didn't believe that I could really take the consequences.
Yeah, right. Send.
No, yeah, exactly. I was just like, well, they're not going to take us away, And then they took us away, and still, like, they limited us over and over and over again, and then they ended the account. It was funny. It was on that trip I was telling you about to Montana. I woke up in a hotel room in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I looked at my phone, and it said we didn't have an Instagram account anymore, and I was addicted to that Instagram account like I was addicted to heroin. I was like, how could they do this to me? And so since then, and we tried to toe the line more. And then on Facebook, they shut down our Facebook account from an interview I did with a clinician at Mountainside around kratom. And I guess we had shown a picture of like a farmer in the Philippines growing kratom or something. And they took our whole page down for an educational kratom post because it's a lot of bots. It's a lot of AI trying to understand it. So what I'm trying to do is not put myself in a situation like that. And I really struggle how to be creative on those platforms and still be entertaining. Like, what the am I supposed to post? Like, I don't know. I'm really trying to figure it out. Like, thinking about doing like cooking videos or something. I don't know what to do. Frankly, you got any ideas?
What about the Nick's reaction videos?
I mean, I would try it. There's this comic I just started following who does these great Nick's reaction videos. So I'm interested.
Dave, thanks so much for coming on, our first guest, Recovery Bros. Where can people listen to the pod? We have like 18 subscribers so far on YouTube, so hopefully you at least get a half a subscriber to your page.
That would be sick. I think that I am so grateful to be your first guest. And I promise you, having me as the first guest means it's only up from here, boys. It's only up from here. You can find Dopey wherever you find anything. Just type in Dopey Podcast and it'll come right up. And I really appreciate you guys having me on. It was a lot of fun. And I learned a little bit too. That's cool.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming and having this conversation with us. And for everyone who's out there, for all 18 of our followers, let's try and get at least two over there.
Even one. One would be fine.
Yeah, one would be great. One would be great.
I'd be okay with nobody too, but whatever. You know, if anybody's listening, our show is called Dopey. Our YouTube is so fucking sad. Doug is the YouTube master. Doug will figure it out. He's the YouTube mastermind. He's got like 150. How many followers? 150,000 followers.
He's like 200 something.
How many?
231.
31. Who's counting, right? 230. I'm at 16,000 and like 200 people watch my videos. I don't understand it. It's like I pray to Jesus and Jesus doesn't help me. Maybe it's because I'm Jewish. I don't know what the problem is. What's the problem, Doug?
I don't know, but the audio seems to crush, so I would just celebrate what you got going good.
I listen. I want you, when you grow Recovery Bros into the next Adversity Advantage Doug Bopst project, let me know exactly what you do so I can copy it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.